Karen believed the royal guard was merely part of her personal show. "We pay for this!" she shouted, tossing a candy wrapper and crossing the forbidden line. But one step forward and the guardsman's icy voice changed everything. When her phone ended up beneath the horse's hooves, the crowd held its breath. What happened next became a lesson for everyone. A rainy summer in London is a sight both gloomy and picturesque. Outside Buckingham Palace, an impressive crowd of tourists had gathered despite the persistent drizzle. Cameras flashed, umbrellas bobbed over heads, and the lively noise gave the impression of a bustling marketplace rather than the royal residence. Amid this chaotic scene stood Jonathan Ridley, a living embodiment of royal discipline and prim British dignity. His red tunic gleamed, and his towering bearskin hat, polished to perfection, bestowed upon him an almost mythical presence. He was as motionless as a stone statue, unshaken by the chaos around him. And then she appeared. Karen, a middle-aged woman whose bright lipstick and loud laughter made her stand out like neon signs on Piccadilly Circus. In her hands was a selfie stick with her phone perched on top, which she twirled like a magic wand, as if it had the power to make everyone dance to her tune. Karen was certain her day was going to be unforgettable, and this guardsman was merely a backdrop for her photo album. "Hey, buddy, smile! We pay taxes for you to entertain us," she called out, half joking, half provoking. Her voice pierced the crowd's chatter like a gunshot, causing a few heads to turn. Cameras immediately began focusing on the unfolding scene. The joke wasn't particularly clever, but in any crowd there are always a few people ready to laugh at anything. Jonathan didn't flinch. His gaze remained fixed on the horizon, his posture flawless. He seemed entirely unaware of Karen or her brazen attempts to grab his attention. But this silent resistance only fueled her determination. She was convinced that the guardsman owed her a response. After all, why else was he there? Karen stepped forward, edging closer to the invisible line tourists were strictly forbidden to cross. Her expression was a mix of irritation and mischievous challenge. "You seriously think you can ignore me?" she shouted, her voice drawing even more attention. The crowd began murmuring, and some started recording videos, eager for something extraordinary to happen. Sensing her moment, Karen extended a hand toward Jonathan's bearskin hat, as if testing whether he was real. But in that instant, something utterly unexpected occurred. The guardsman spoke. "Step back, ma'am," he said firmly and clearly, without raising his voice, but with such authority that Karen seemed to falter. His words sounded like a command that could not be defied. The crowd burst into laughter. Someone shouted, "No way! He spoke!" Chuckles erupted from all sides, but now they were aimed at Karen, not the guardsman. The woman froze, momentarily stunned. She wasn't used to being the butt of the joke. Her face flushed, and a spark of defiance lit up in her eyes. This was only the beginning of the conflict, which was about to escalate further. Despite her outward confidence, Karen was clearly offended by the guardsman's cold indifference. How could this be? Wasn't he there for her, to cater to her whims? In her mind, the logic was simple. She was a tourist, she paid taxes, though who said she was even British? And he was just part of the spectacle. His job was to stand there, endure and entertain. Yet now, this man in the red tunic, as if mocking her, refused to play by her rules. Karen scoffed, her face twisting with displeasure. "Come on, you're just a puppet in this circus. Show me something," she shouted, raising her hand with a candy wrapper. The crowd began to stir. People murmured. Some pulled out their phones to record the scene, sensing that something interesting was about to unfold. The wrapper, crumpled into a tiny ball, was flung in Jonathan's direction. It wasn't dangerous, of course, but the very act, how dare she? The wrapper landed at the guardsman's feet, yet his stillness remained unshaken. Seriously, even his eyelashes didn't twitch. His composure was astounding, though not to everyone. "What discipline!" someone whispered in awe. But others, including Karen, took it as a sign of weakness. "He's just scared," muttered a guy with a camera, and hearing this, Karen's boldness only grew. The crowd grew thicker, people pressing closer to avoid missing the spectacle. Some laughed, some filmed, while others were clearly uncomfortable. A woman standing off to the side with her young daughter finally spoke up. "Leave him alone! He's just doing his job!" Her voice was firm, carrying a note of desperate defense for the guardsman. The little girl clung to her mother's hand, her wide eyes filled with disbelief at what was happening. But Karen, of course, had no intention of backing down. She ignored the woman's protest, turned to the crowd, and loudly proclaimed, "If he's a real soldier, he'll withstand this." Her voice carried a challenge that was beginning to irritate even those who had found her antics amusing moments ago. And then she crossed the line, the literal line marking the boundary between tourists and the restricted area. The crowd froze. "Did you see that?" whispered a girl with a camera to her friend. Karen, as if she had been waiting for this moment, began walking deliberately toward a mounted guardsman stationed nearby. The horse, sensing her approach, flicked its ears nervously. Its glossy coat trembled, as though the animal itself could sense the trouble brewing. Karen stepped closer. Her footsteps echoed loudly, as if the entire palace had fallen silent. The horse shifted slightly, its heavy hoof thudding against the ground. Its rider, another guardsman, sat immobile, as though utterly detached from the scene. Yet his gaze, cold and piercing, lingered on Karen long enough to make it clear. She had crossed a line. The crowd murmured, but now it wasn't playful or amused. The tension in the air was palpable, a mix of unease and anticipation. What would happen next? Karen, now the center of attention, seemed to relish her moment of triumph. She looked at the horse, then at the guardsman, her expression dripping with contempt for the rules and traditions she was flouting. "Come on, show me you're alive," she muttered, looking directly at the horse. But by now, not everyone in the crowd was entertained. Outbursts of disapproval rippled through the onlookers. Yet Karen, having lost all sense of propriety, continued her defiant march forward, convinced that her right to a spectacle trumped everything else. Jonathan, whose patience seemed forged from steel, suddenly did something no one expected. His gleaming boots softly slid across the stone pavement as he took a single deliberate step forward. One clear, confident step that shattered the silence now hanging over the crowd. "Ma'am, please return behind the line," he said. His voice was low and steady, yet it carried such authority that even the boldest tourists froze in their tracks. This wasn't just a voice. It was a warning, backed by centuries of tradition and the honor of the royal guard. Karen froze. Actually, froze might be an understatement. She seemed to momentarily forget how to breathe. That moment, when a person realizes they've crossed a line they never should have, struck her unexpectedly and painfully. She tried to retreat, to act as if she still had control, but her foot caught on the curb, and then it happened. Fate's cruel punchline. Her phone, her pride and joy, her constant companion, her instrument of power, slipped from her grasp. It performed a dramatic, almost cinematic arc through the air, only to land squarely beneath the hooves of the horse. The crowd gasped. Of course they did. You would have too. Someone even stepped back, as if fearing the phone might explode or trigger an even greater disaster. The horse flicked its ears nervously and shifted its weight, briefly raising the stakes with a heavy stomp. "And Jonathan?" His face remained as composed as ever. Not a flicker of irritation, not the faintest hint of satisfaction or amusement. He simply bent down, gracefully, without haste, as if retrieving not a phone, but some ancient relic destined for the queen herself. When he straightened, phone in hand, the crowd collectively held its breath. He stepped toward Karen, who, to her credit, was already blushing every imaginable shade of red. Her confidence, once seemingly unshakable, had crumbled into tiny fragments no camera could piece back together. "Please be more careful," Jonathan said with icy calm. His words sounded less like a simple remark and more like a solemn verdict. And Karen felt every syllable. The crowd erupted into applause. People laughed, cheered, and shouted things like, "That's class! And serves her right!" Karen stood rooted to the spot, unsure where to put her hands, feet, or anything else. Her face burned as she muttered something unintelligible and snatched the phone from his hand. It was, perhaps, her quietest moment all day. Jonathan simply turned, adjusted his hat with precision, and returned to his post. For him, it was just another moment in the line of duty. But for everyone who witnessed it, it was a masterclass in how dignity and composure could completely disarm arrogance. When Jonathan returned to his post, adjusting his bearskin hat, the scene fell into momentary silence. His movements were calm, devoid of any smugness, which undoubtedly irritated those who had been hoping for a more dramatic spectacle. But not everyone felt that way. "This has to go online!" someone shouted from the crowd. That phrase, like a signal, sparked a new wave of activity. Smartphones shot up into the air. Some people were already editing short videos, adding dramatic music, while others brainstormed hashtags to maximize attention. And soon, it appeared. #respect. The guards, a banner not only honoring Jonathan, but also condemning Karen's antics. Clips of her embarrassed expression, juxtaposed with Jonathan's icy calmness, spread across social media at lightning speed. Some laughed at her absurdity, while others genuinely admired the guardsman's composure. "Now this is what discipline looks like," someone commented under a post. "Way to go! Karens belong at home, not at Buckingham Palace," another chimed in. Karen, of course, couldn't ignore the online storm. When she saw herself in hundreds of videos, with comments pouring in like a hurricane of judgment, she had no choice but to admit defeat. "I realize I was wrong. These people deserve respect," she wrote under one of the videos, adding a smiley face in a clumsy attempt to smooth over the awkwardness. Did it work? Judging by the comments, not really. But at least she apologized. Jonathan, meanwhile, remained steadfast at his post, as if nothing had happened. His face showed the same composure it had when he calmly handed Karen her phone. For him, it was just another day on duty. No emotions, no deliberate gestures. He understood that in his role there was no room for theatrics, only poise and discipline. Yet deep down, he recognized that today's incident was more than just an ordinary event. It had become a symbol of enduring traditions in a world where such values are increasingly tested. As the crowd realized the show was over, it gradually began to disperse. Some continued discussing what they had witnessed, while others filmed quick videos against the backdrop of the palace. But there was one sentiment that now united nearly everyone present: respect. For the guards, for their work, for the culture they represented. And in that, perhaps, lay Jonathan's greatest victory. He hadn't spoken a single unnecessary word, hadn't let his emotions take control, yet he had become a living example of how to maintain dignity in even the most absurd and frustrating situations. The lesson stayed with everyone. Respect for tradition isn't just a formality, it's the foundation of culture, a reminder of who we are.